Hi, it's me, Jacqueline. Welcome to my channel. If you are new to the channel, then please subscribe to my channel and join me at Patreon. Link in the description. The next morning felt different. The air seemed heavier, like it was weighed down by the knowledge I couldn't shake. Grayson, a journalist with a knack for finding secrets and dragging them into the light. My secret wasn't just at risk. It felt like it was already slipping through my fingers. I sat at the kitchen table, picking at my cereal as Aunt Shirley poured herself a cup of coffee. She was uncharacteristically quiet, her usual sharp wit dulled by the seriousness of what we were facing. "You need to keep your head down at school," she said finally, breaking the silence. "Grayson's the kind of person who thrives on chaos. If he thinks he's rattled you, he'll double down." I nodded, though the thought of laying low felt impossible. School was a maze of eyes and whispers, and no matter how careful I was, I couldn't escape the feeling that someone was always watching. At school, things started normally enough. Lydia met me at my locker, her usual bubbly energy a welcome distraction. "Guess what?" she said, grinning. "Richard asked if you're free Friday night. He wants to take you to the movies." I froze, the words not quite registering. "The movies?" "Yes, the movies. You know, popcorn, big screen, awkward first date vibes." Lydia teased. "I don't think that's a good idea," I said quickly. Her smile faltered. "Why not? He's into you, Lexi. You deserve to have a little fun." Fun. The word felt foreign, almost laughable given everything going on. But the thought of saying no to Richard felt worse. He'd been nothing but kind, and part of me wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could let myself enjoy something normal for once. "I'll think about it," I said finally, and Lydia seemed satisfied with that. But as the day wore on, it became clear that normal was no longer an option. Between classes, I caught glimpses of people staring at me, their whispers trailing behind like smoke. By lunch, the weight of their attention was unbearable. I skipped the cafeteria, hiding out in the library instead. I texted Stephen during my free period, needing some kind of reassurance. His reply came quickly, "Stay calm. We're working on it." Working on it. Those 3 words were all I had to hold on to, but they didn't stop the growing sense of dread that followed me home. That evening, Aunt Shirley called a meeting at the house. Stephen arrived first, his expression as grim as I felt. He spread out a series of documents on the dining room table, each one covered in notes and highlighted passages. "This is everything we've been able to find on Grayson," he said. "He's relentless, but he's not invincible. He's been sued multiple times for defamation. If we can prove he's harassing you, we might be able to shut him down." "And how do we prove that?" I asked, my voice shaky. Stephen glanced at Shirley, who sighed and sat down across from me. "We use his methods against him," she said. "We dig into his life, his history. Find out why he's so interested in you. People like him always have skeletons in their closet." The idea of turning the tables was tempting, but it felt dangerous. "What if it backfires?" "Then we deal with it," Shirley said firmly. "But sitting back and waiting for him to strike isn't an option." Stephen nodded. "This isn't just about protecting your identity, Lexi. It's about taking control of your narrative. If we stay silent, we're letting him define you. We can't let that happen." Their confidence was reassuring, but I couldn't ignore the knot in my stomach. This was bigger than anything I'd ever faced, and the thought of fighting back felt overwhelming. The next day at school, things took an unexpected turn. During lunch, Richard approached me, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced by something more serious. "Hey, can we talk?" he asked. "Sure," I said, though the unease in his voice set me on edge. We found a quiet corner near the auditorium, away from the prying eyes of the cafeteria. Richard hesitated, running a hand through his hair before finally speaking. "Someone's been asking about you," he said. "Some guy came to my dad's shop yesterday, asking questions about Alex Montgomery. Said he was a journalist working on a story." My heart stopped. "What did he say?" "Not much," Richard said. "Just that he was looking into your family." But the way he talked, it felt off. Like he already knew what he wanted to find. I forced myself to stay calm, though panic was clawing at the edges of my mind. "Did your dad tell him anything?" "No," Richard said quickly. But Lexi, who is this guy? And why's he looking into you? I hesitated. Richard deserved the truth, but the risks were too high. I don't know, I said finally. Probably just some mix-up. He didn't look convinced, but he didn't push further. Well, if he comes back, let me know. My dad said the guy was intense. That night, I told Shirley and Stephen about the encounter. Stephen's expression darkened. Grayson's getting bold, he said. We need to move fast. Shirley nodded, her resolve hardening. We'll start digging tonight. But Lexi, you need to be ready. If he's pushing this hard, it's only a matter of time before he tries something bigger. I nodded, though the weight of their words felt suffocating. The fight was just beginning, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what was coming next. The weight of the situation pressed heavily on me as the days passed. Grayson's shadow loomed over everything, and no matter how much Shirley and Stephen reassured me, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was only a matter of time before something gave. At school, Lydia tried her best to keep things normal. She made jokes, dragged me into conversations, and did everything she could to distract me from the storm brewing in my life. But her efforts couldn't stop the whispers that followed me through the hallways or the occasional pointed glances that felt far too knowing. Richard, too, seemed to sense the tension. He'd been quieter lately, his usual easy charm replaced by a watchful concern. He didn't push for answers, but his silence was almost worse. It felt like he was waiting for me to crack. By Friday, I was on edge. Every interaction felt like a test, every moment like a countdown. The final bell rang, and I practically sprinted to the parking lot, desperate to get home and regroup. But as I reached my car, I saw him. Grayson. He was leaning casually against a black sedan, his arms crossed and a faint smirk on his face. My heart stopped, and for a moment, I considered turning around and walking away. But something in his eyes told me that wouldn't work. Alexis Montgomery, he said, his voice calm and smooth. Or do you prefer Lexi? I froze, my fingers tightening around the strap of my bag. What do you want? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. Grayson straightened, taking a step toward me. I think you know the answer to that, he said. You've been quite the mystery, Lexi. And I do love a good mystery. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Every instinct was screaming at me to run, but my feet felt rooted to the ground. You've got quite the story, he continued, his tone conversational. Small-town kid, big secrets, a whole new life. It's compelling, really. The kind of thing people would love to read about. My stomach churned. Why are you doing this? Grayson tilted his head, studying me like I was some kind of puzzle. Because people like you, you're fascinating. You think you can just reinvent yourself, pretend to be someone you're not, and no one will notice? The world doesn't work that way. I'm not pretending, I said, my voice trembling. His smirk widened. Aren't you? Look, Lexi, I'm not here to ruin your life. I'm just here to tell your story. The truth. And the truth has a funny way of coming out, whether you want it to or not. I didn't know what to say. Every word felt like it would only dig me deeper, give him more ammunition. So I did the only thing I could think of. I turned and walked away. Think about it, he called after me. The world's going to find out eventually. Wouldn't you rather control the narrative? His words followed me all the way home, echoing in my mind like a bad song on repeat. By the time I walked through the front door, I was shaking. Shirley was in the kitchen, her laptop open and a notebook full of scribbled notes beside her. She looked up as I entered, her expression immediately darkening. What happened? He was there, I said, dropping my bag onto the floor. At school. He talked to me. Shirley stood, crossing the room in 3 quick strides. What did he say? He knows everything, I said, my voice breaking. He said he wants to tell my story. That the truth's going to come out no matter what I do. Stephen arrived a short while later, his usual calm demeanor replaced by a sharp intensity. Grayson's escalating, he said after I told him what happened. He's trying to scare you into cooperating. Well, it's working, I snapped. What am I supposed to do? Just let him ruin my life. No, Stephen said firmly. But we need to be smart about this. If you react emotionally, you're playing right into his hands. Shirley nodded. We've got options, Lexi. Grayson's not untouchable. But we need to be careful. The rest of the evening was spent strategizing. Stephen made calls, pulling in favors from contacts I didn't even know he had. Shirley combed through Grayson's past, looking for anything that could be used against him. And I sat there, feeling utterly helpless. By midnight, we had a plan. It was risky and complicated, but it was the best shot we had. Stephen and Shirley would handle the logistics, and I would focus on staying out of Grayson's way. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't enough. Grayson wasn't just a threat to my secret, he was a threat to my entire life. And if we didn't stop him soon, I wasn't sure what would be left. The day after Grayson's confrontation felt like a blur. I woke up groggy, my dreams haunted by his smirking face and the echoes of his words. Wouldn't you rather control the narrative? The thought of going to school was unbearable, but Shirley insisted. If you skip now, it'll look like you've got something to hide, she said over breakfast. Her calm, steady tone was comforting, even if her words weren't. Lydia was waiting for me at my locker, her usual bright smile faltering as she saw my expression. You look like you've seen a ghost, she said. Something like that, I muttered, fiddling with the lock. She leaned against the lockers, crossing her arms. Are you going to tell me what's going on, or do I have to guess? I hesitated. Lydia had always been there for me, but this wasn't something I could explain in a casual hallway chat. It's complicated, I said finally. She studied me for a moment, her eyes narrowing. Does this have anything to do with that guy from the other day? The one asking questions? My stomach dropped. What do you mean? Richard mentioned him, she said. Said he was poking around, asking about your family. I forced myself to stay calm, though my heart was racing. He's just someone from out of town. Nothing to worry about. Lydia didn't look convinced, but she didn't push further. If you say so, she said, her tone skeptical. But if you need to talk, you know where to find me. I nodded, grateful for her support even if I couldn't fully let her in. The day dragged on, each class blending into the next. I couldn't focus, my mind constantly drifting back to Grayson and his veiled threats. By the time the final bell rang, I was ready to bolt, but fate had other plans. Richard was waiting for me by the parking lot, his expression unreadable. Hey, he said as I approached. Hey, I replied, trying to sound casual. Can we talk? He asked, his voice soft but insistent. I hesitated, glancing around. The lot was busy, students milling about as they headed home, but there was no sign of Grayson. Sure, I said finally. Richard led me to a quiet corner near the edge of the lot. That guy, he started, his tone serious. The one asking about you. Who is he? I told you, he's nobody, I said quickly. Richard shook his head. Don't do that, Lexi. Don't lie to me. I know something's going on, and I want to help. The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. Richard had always been kind, but this was different. He wasn't just being nice, he genuinely cared. I can't, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. Can't what? He asked. Tell you, I said, looking away. It's too complicated. Too dangerous. Dangerous? He repeated, his brow furrowing. What are you talking about? Before I could answer, a familiar black sedan pulled into the lot, its engine rumbling ominously. My blood ran cold as Grayson stepped out, his sharp gaze scanning the crowd before locking onto me. Is that him? Richard asked, his voice low. I nodded, unable to speak. Richard's jaw tightened. Stay here, he said, starting toward the car. No! I grabbed his arm, stopping him. You don't understand. He's not someone you can just talk to. Richard hesitated, his concern evident. Then what do we do? Nothing, I said firmly. Just let me handle it. Reluctantly, Richard nodded, though I could see the frustration in his eyes. Grayson didn't approach me this time. He stood by his car, watching, a faint smirk on his face. It was a game to him, a twisted power play, and I hated that it was working. When I got home, Shirley and Stephen were already waiting, their expressions grim. He was there again, I said before they could ask. Shirley cursed under her breath, her calm exterior cracking for the first time. "He's pushing harder," she said. "He wants you to crack." Stephen nodded. "We're running out of time. If we don't act soon, he'll make his move, and we won't be able to stop him." "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. Shirley exchanged a look with Stephen before turning back to me. "We fight back," she said simply. "If he wants to expose you, we expose him first." Their plan was bold, almost reckless, but it was our only option. Stephen had uncovered details about Grayson's past, a history of unethical journalism, lawsuits, and scandals that painted him as far from the noble truth seeker he pretended to be. The next step was risky, but it was the only way to level the playing field. We would confront Grayson directly, armed with everything we had. That night, as I lay in bed, the plan replayed in my mind like a script. There was no room for error, no second chances. If we failed, it wasn't just my secret on the line, it was everything I'd worked for. Please subscribe for the next part and visit my Patreon page for early access.